Issue 1, general advice. Question. Abizaid floated the idea that the U.S. can live with a nuclear-armed Iran. Was that irresponsible?
We are simply too overextended to deal with Iran. We should have done Iran first. We should have attacked. I mean, Iran was the true terrorist state. It's been a terrorist state since 1979. If we were going to effect regime change, not that we necessarily should have, it should have been in Iran. The whole discussion is moot, other than to lean on our allies in Europe and so forth to try to put pressure on Iran. But the idea that we have to learn to live with a nuclear Iran, we can't live with a nuclear Iran. Either way, we have no choice because we can't do anything about it, mainly because of the Iraq fiasco.
Do we need a new doctrine?
A new doctrine meaning a new nuclear doctrine. There was an interesting little snippet on the American Heritage blog today about what defines a great power. You know, it always used to mean the nuclear powers, of which there are now 6. Or should the idea of a great power be strictly an economic power? Economic power is, and diplomatic power is the important power nowadays. Not even so much nuclear power. North Korea has nuclear weapons and so forth. And in the aftermath of September 11th, the whole world was behind us. That was having power. That power was squandered by the Bush administration. Now pretty much the whole world hates us. So we have no diplomatic power. We still do have economic power. Iran can get a nuclear weapon. They're still constrained energy-wise. They're not going to be an economic power. They do have they had an educated middle class in a way that Iraq does not have. They have better institutions relative to, say, Saudi Arabia. So Iran sort of had the ability to elevate itself into being a great power, at least regionally. Now, being a radical Islamic theocracy, who knows?
Okay, Ahmadinejad snubbed.
The interesting thing about Ahmadinejad, this episode was before the Columbia speech. It is now after the Columbia speech. And the interesting thing from my perspective is the disagreement in the pundit sphere about where everybody knew that Ahmadinejad was going to get mocked at Columbia, and he was. There was laughter, there was gasping, but people disagreed about whether that mocking was going to make it, the video and so forth, back to Iran. Some people said this is going to be great because Iranian students, Iranian middle class will be able to see over the internet their leader, who is an idiot, who is just detached from reality, mocked by an American audience, and that would be a good thing. Other people said, oh no, that's not going to happen. It's all going to get edited out. They're not going to see that, and it's going to then turn into a positive propaganda tool for him. The earliest indications as of today have basically been that the latter view was correct. That whole debate about whether it was good for him to do this or not as propaganda, it seems so far, although it's early, that it was a victory for him.
Let's get back to Abizaid. Can the U.S. live with a nuclear-armed Iran, and that there is no need for a preemptive strike that could lead to another full-scale war in the Middle East?
Again, that's not our choice to make. We cannot possibly bomb Iran. It would be the single worst disaster. We don't have the resources to do it. We don't have the goodwill in the world to do it, and it would accomplish nothing.
Issue 2, HillaryCare returns. Question, has Hillary hit on a winning prescription for what ails America's health care?
I think it's important to keep a few basic premises in mind when we talk about health care reform, whether it's Clinton's or anybody else's. I do not recognize the authority of the federal government to mandate individuals to have health insurance. I think you have a fundamental right to be an idiot and not have health insurance, either because you're independently wealthy or because you're young and healthy. But I don't recognize the authority of the federal government to engage in mandates. That's number one. Number two, we already have health care, government-funded, taxpayer-funded health care for the poor. It's called Medicaid. To the extent that we have an issue with the poor, then it's because Medicaid has failed. And let's talk about maybe expanding Medicaid, improving Medicaid. The idea, SHIP, the whole SHIP debate, which I just blogged about. Why do we even have SHIP? Kids need health insurance. Well, if they're rich kids, let the rich parents deal with it. And if they're poor, then how come they're not on Medicaid? Why do we need this entire SHIP program, including people with 2 houses, a pool, and a pinball machine, go read my blog, are getting taxpayer subsidized health insurance? It's absolutely preposterous. As for the Hillary plan specifically, I think it's hilarious that it really is Mitt Romney's plan. And who is the one person who insists that it's not the Romney plan? Of course, it's Mitt Romney. So, and I think that shows just what a farce this whole debate is. The other thing that keeps getting lost in the debate about healthcare reform is that the problem of employer insurance, the differential tax advantage for the employer offering the benefits but not offering cash, for which the employee can then go and buy tax-advantaged insurance. This is all a creation of the government. This is the tax code, and it goes back, incidentally, to World War II. So the idea that this is some kind of structural failure of the system, of course not. It's a government failure of the system that goes back to the New Deal, goes back to the Democratic administration in World War II, and bipartisan nonsense in the 50 years since. Why don't we talk about scrapping this system of differential tax advantage, get employers out of the healthcare benefit business, have them just pay people salaries that are higher, and have people go out and shop around. Start dismantling what the problem is. This is a government-created problem. The poor, yes, we can have a modest welfare state that includes healthcare for the poor. We have it. It's called Medicaid, and we can have Medicaid be expanded to the extent necessary.
In the upcoming presidential election, does Hillary have a lock on this healthcare sensitive issue, which now ranks 2 after Iraq?
No, of course not, for several reasons. First of all, she still has the baggage of 1993. Harry and Louise, was it? You remember those commercials? No matter how much improved, how much less socialist her plan is, it's going to have tremendous scrutiny. People, first of all, 40% of the population simply won't vote for her, and some overlapping subset will distrust anything she says regarding any kind of healthcare government expansion. And whoever the Republican nominee is going to have an alternative, and the Republican Party as a whole will have an alternative. People will run congressionally, either for or against the program. The idea that this is the de facto solution, first of all, it's not de facto that she's going to be the nominee. It's certainly not a given that she's going to be the president, and it is not a given that this is going to be the plan that's going to be implemented. That just doesn't make sense.
All the time. Bye-bye.
No, I have a prediction. The Supreme Court announced that it will take on 17 additional cases in the next term, which starts next week, I believe, one of which is voter ID law in Indiana. The Supreme Court is going to hold that voter ID laws are not per se unconstitutional. They're probably going to embrace something similar to the situation that settled itself out in Georgia, which I blogged about, where it is permissible, it will be deemed permissible for a state to require a government-issued ID in order to vote, so long as there is a zero-cost option available for the indigent. The problem with voter ID is the idea, well, I can't afford an ID. If the state says, well, we'll give you a free ID, but we're still going to require you to present it when you vote, I don't think the Supreme Court's going to have a problem with that.